You were not forgotten. You were hidden by someone who feared what God placed inside you. Your silence wasn't a phase. It was protection. You heard what they tried to bury. They knew you'd remember one day. That day just began. You weren't rebellious. You were remembering, and they called it disobedience. There's a reason you flinch when someone says family. It started before you could speak. You were marked, not broken. Their shame covered your light. The one who tucked your truth under the rug still watches to see if you've noticed. That childhood dream was memory. What you saw, you were never supposed to survive. You didn't imagine it. You inherited a truth too heavy for their silence. God saw what they labeled as too sensitive. That was discernment, not weakness. Someone buried your divine name in that old family book. Go look again. The one who hugged you most held the most to hide. You were not clumsy. You were being spiritually shaken awake. They made fun of your imaginary friend. But heaven was already visiting. You knew the family secret before you knew your own name. Your tears as a child weren't random. Your soul was reacting to buried pain. They changed the story. God kept the original. That scar on your spirit has a date. They've just never spoken it. The cousin who vanished holds a piece of your truth. The nightmares were echoes. Ancestral warnings. You were too young to understand. You weren't weak. You were chosen. They feared who you'd become if you healed. Someone in your family prayed no one would ever tell you. You didn't forget. You were forced to forget. They punished you for asking too many questions. But you were never meant to obey their silence. The photo album skips the year they fear the most. You carry what they call weird because it's holy. Your name was almost changed. Your destiny nearly stolen. You didn't lie. You were lied to. The one who raised you feared what you saw in dreams. You weren't dramatic. You were spiritually alert. Your childhood wasn't normal. It was divine interference. They knew you would find the truth, so they fed you distractions. What they called your phase was actually prophecy awakening. You felt different because you were different. That's the whole point. That recurring dream? A memory in disguise. You asked the right question. They gave the safest lie. You were born to shatter the family's false peace. They whispered over your crib. God, don't let them remember. Your gift scared them, so they told you it was sin. You were chosen to uncover what they swore to forget. That old attic box holds more than objects. It holds what's left of your silence. Your childhood wound is actually a sealed instruction. The strange moment you still replay? That was the day you first awakened. You were exiled in your own home and called it love. The family member you trust least knows the most. They tried to love you in exchange for your forgetfulness. That smell, that sound, that room, you're not crazy. Your body remembers. The lie was practiced, repeated, perfected, but your soul knows better. You were too loud because silence made their secret echo louder. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. You were loved by someone heaven took early. They tried to warn you. You were almost named after someone who died in guilt. You didn't just hear whispers. You heard the past screaming to be healed. You cried during storms because the wind reminded you of truth. They fear you'll ask about the year no one mentions. You didn't imagine the fear in their eyes that night. You were remembering. You carry a curse and a crown, and they know it. The truth has been rearranged to look like love. God whispered your name before your mother did. You were meant to expose what they normalized. The moment you start healing, someone close gets nervous. The one who always says, "Don't look back," is hiding the backstory. You were born to correct a mistake they tried to bury. They hoped you'd inherit the silence. You didn't. Your sensitivity was protection. They called it rebellion. That childhood illness wasn't medical. It was spiritual. You were the sign they asked for, but didn't want. God sealed you for later revelation. That time is now. The family story is missing your page for a reason. Your voice sounds like someone they betrayed. You laughed loudly as a child because it scared the spirits off. You weren't confused. You were remembering the parts they erased. You saw too much too young, and they called it imagination. The one you avoid knows the whole truth. You dream in code because the truth is still encrypted. You've been followed by what they tried to leave behind. You were the offering they never asked your soul to give. What they protected you from was your own awakening. They said it was for your own good. It wasn't. Your return to this memory is divine timing. Someone left you a note in their silence. You weren't born to obey. You were born to remember. You were kept from someone who knew your purpose. The family house holds a silence that trembles when you speak. The one who told you to forget never did. You've always heard the hum of truth under the noise. You felt misplaced because your calling couldn't fit inside their structure. You were born into that bloodline to redeem it. Your shadow knows the truth your family denied. That ache isn't confusion, it's memory returning. Someone's been protecting you from what they once helped hide. Your gift activated early. So did their fear. They laughed when you said you saw angels, but they locked the room afterward. The part of the story no one tells you were there. You were never supposed to know, but you were never supposed to forget either. Your childhood holds more prophecy than pain. They sealed it in a room. Heaven left the door open. You know already. You're just waiting for someone to say it. Your memory was dimmed, but not erased. They'll pretend to be surprised when you finally speak. You were loved deeply by the one they never mention. The words they avoid are the ones that define you. You were never supposed to be one of them. You were sent to them. Someone changed the birth record. Look again. You had dreams that felt like movies. They were warnings. You asked a question at 5. They never looked at you the same. You weren't supposed to survive that moment, but God interfered. They chose silence. You were chosen for truth. The day you stopped talking, they sighed in relief. Someone swore to the grave never to tell, but heaven is speaking anyway. Your anger is holy. Your intuition, divine revenge. You were meant to break this story wide open. They thought you were too young to understand. You were too divine to forget. God preserved you in confusion so you wouldn't self-destruct. The one who held your hand tightest feared you'd ask why. You weren't misbehaving. You were interrupting the lie. The room they never let you enter holds your answers. That one sentence you heard by accident was never accidental. Your destiny was rearranged the moment they realized your power. You walked past your own truth 1,000 times. One more step. What you called weird was your inheritance. You forgave what they never confessed. Your silence was survival. But now speak. They gaslit your memory. God restored it in secret. The one who seemed most kind was keeping most quiet. You were born from prophecy, not pain. But they reversed the script. You were never broken. They just couldn't understand a light that bright in someone so small. They didn't protect you. They protected the secret you carry. Your name was whispered over altars before you could walk. You were touched by the unseen, and they called it strange. The lie they told you buried your beginning. You remembered too much too early. So they taught you to forget. A door was locked. Behind it, the truth of who you are. You weren't sensitive. You were anointed, and they feared it. They tried to silence you before heaven crowned you. You came speaking in dreams. That terrified their guilt. You weren't meant to blend in. You were born to expose. The wound you carry is not yours, but you were chosen to heal it. They told you it didn't happen, but your spirit never stopped bleeding. You were not born into that family. You were sent. The one who held you closest knew what they covered. They changed your story, but heaven kept the original. You didn't forget. You were spiritually sedated. You were never the problem. You were the prophecy. They celebrated your silence because it protected their shame. You laughed too loudly for a house built on secrets. You were left out of the photo because you reminded them of truth. They feared your memory more than your voice. God watched them call your gift a disorder. That moment you still feel in your bones. It was real. You were a divine interruption to a generational lie. You were hidden, not lost. Protected by the very silence they mocked. You wept in your sleep because your soul remembered what your mind could not. Someone altered your timeline, but prophecy has no expiration. You weren't disobedient. You were disoriented by what no child should bear. They erased the name of the one who truly loved you. You weren't too much. You were the awakening they resisted. That place you avoid still holds your voice. You walked away from family gatherings, feeling hollow. That was spirit recognition. You were assigned a cover story before you were born. Their version of your childhood was their defense against exposure. You've been protecting the ones who buried your truth. You still dream in shadows because the light was locked away. You were told to be grateful, but you were being erased. They chose silence. God chose you. The one they warned you about held your deliverance. Your fear of remembering is the proof it happened. You were born a portal. They closed you out of fear. The lie they told became your inner voice. Mute it. You never fit in because you weren't made to conform. You were made to reveal. You were spiritually awake at 5. They called it misbehavior. Someone watched and said nothing. That silence still echoes. You carry an ache no doctor could name. You left parts of yourself in that room. Go retrieve them. You knew too much, so they gave you a new story. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. You were punished for telling the truth too soon. You were a question they never wanted to answer. They feared the day you'd remember. That day is today. Your instincts were right. Your memories were not lies. That accident was orchestrated to redirect your future. You were stolen from the version of you that could have thrived. Your innocence was their inconvenience. That scar in your spirit wasn't born, it was given. You saw an angel once. They called it delirium. You were taught to forget your divine language. What you thought was rebellion was divine resistance. You cried when certain people entered the room. Your soul remembered them. You were never forgettable. You were concealed. The one who protected, you did so to keep you quiet. You weren't moody. You were absorbing energies not meant for a child. You didn't lie. They couldn't admit your truth. They told you to stop dreaming because your dreams held proof. You were born under a prophecy they tried to cancel. The house you grew up in still holds spiritual screams. You weren't cursed. You were consecrated. Someone feared you'd grow into your knowing. You became the secret they feared would speak. The real reason they distanced themselves? You were remembering. You were gifted, and so they exiled you. You felt unseen because you were never meant to fit their false light. They fed you shame and called it love. You were meant to rise from what they buried. You stopped trusting early because someone broke your trust before you had words. You were never dramatic. You were divinely aware. You still flinch when truth knocks. Someone made a vow that you'd never speak. You lived in a house of silence and learned to whisper your pain. You were exiled spiritually long before you moved away. They gave you a name. Heaven wrote another. You weren't overlooked. You were spiritually concealed. That gift you hid as a child, it's time to open it. You were the answer to a curse they swore was broken. Someone remembers what happened and hopes you never do. The emptiness you feel is unspoken history. You were chosen to unseal what others died protecting. Your pain is sacred memory, not madness. You were taught to pray to a God who already lived in you. That ache when you visit home? Your soul remembering exile. You cried in certain rooms for reasons you couldn't explain. Trust that. Someone else carried your guilt, so you'd carry their silence. You weren't the problem. You were the prophecy's proof. The one they praised was the one who watched it happen. Your memory is divine evidence. They say they don't remember. That's how you know they do. The silence after your birth was louder than your first cry. You knew something was wrong, but no one let you name it. You've been walking with invisible wounds. and still healing others. Someone buried your origin story in their guilt. That missing year of childhood isn't lost. It's sealed. You weren't being punished. You were being prepared. The one who yelled the most feared your clarity. You loved deeply. They hid things deeply. You carry the ache of withheld truths. That birthday you don't remember held a storm. You weren't rejected. You were divinely rerouted. They were afraid of who you'd become if you were whole. Someone wept the day you remembered. That childhood illness wasn't physical. It was inherited spiritual trauma. You cried at night not from fear, but from unspoken knowing. You were never small, just spiritually misunderstood. You still flinch when someone praises your intuition because it once cost you peace. You weren't just gifted. You were divinely encoded. You carry memory in your bones. That's why they hurt. You didn't overreact. You saw what they hoped to hide. The truth is not gone, it's circling back. You remembered too much, too soon, too loudly. The ones who kept you quiet kept themselves hidden too. You stopped asking questions when the silence grew violent. You were made to speak, not settle. That room you avoid, your soul never left it. You knew then what they still deny. You were born knowing, then trained to unknow. Someone else's shame was placed on your shoulders. They rewrote your story, but heaven saved the rough draft. You were always a mirror. That's why they looked away. The gift they denied is the truth you carry. Your awakening was always their fear.